In the changing 20s, Paris provided a movable feast for Hemingway, Picasso, Fitzgerald, and Joyce. While in the chaos after the Great Crash, Berlin briefly erupted with a savage iconoclasm of Breck and Bauhaus. During the shell-shocked 1940s, thrusting New York led the way. And in the uneasy 1950s, it was the easy Rome of La Dolce Vita. Today, it is London, a city steeped with tradition, seized by change, liberated by affluence, graced by daffodils and anemones, so green with parks and squares that, as the saying goes, you could walk across it on the grass. In a decade dominated by youth, London has burst into bloom. It swings, it is the scene. To the lively Londoner, no explanations are really necessary. Talking the flip jargon that has been the basic English for teenagers, jet-setters, and indeed any knowledgeable adult striving to maintain the illusion that he is at least young and hot. The switched-on London bird or beetle calls his herb super, fab, groovy, gear, close, or with it. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Dion, and yeah, I did see Priscilla this week. How can you tell? Last week in my personal style video, I talked about how currently I am incredibly inspired by swinging 60s fashion, and specifically swinging 60s London. After seeing Priscilla, I had to do this video, you guys. We gotta talk about the swinging 60s London fashion. This is one of my favorite eras of fashion ever since I was like an elementary school kid. There was something so special about this time period. So we're gonna talk a little bit about what was going on in the time period, the context of what led to this youth movement in 1963-4, and what was the music, the fashion, all of that jazz, how to get the look, how to modernize it. So if you do like vintage fashion, then definitely subscribe to my channel because I post videos every Thursday. And with that, let's get into it. My intro story was an excerpt from Time Magazine's 1966 cover story article, London, the Swinging City. That Time Magazine article really solidified London as the city of the 1960s. So going back, we have to think about in the United States, World War II, yes, we were affected by it. We had rations, we had obviously men going off to war, women in the workplace, and we all did scale back in the mid 40s. After that, the 50s in the United States had this economic boom, got the T-birds, we got, the suburban houses, etc. England, Britain, was in World War II way earlier than the United States, and it was on their soil. I mean, they were getting bombed, they were getting obliterated for years prior to the United States ever actually going into World War II. And the reason why I'm saying this is because England, Britain, London, etc., the war hit them way harder. World War I hit the UK super hard, and World War II really kicked the UK's ass. And as a result, everyone was rationing everything. Clothing was drab. Everyone only had like one dress, one suit. That was it. Frivolity was basically a sin because it was basically giving an FU to the war if you were doing anything remotely frivolous, fun, colorful, etc. People were being sent off to war the minute they turned 18. So this idea of like a youth culture movement wasn't really there prior to the 1960s because most youth were getting married or dying in war prior to them even becoming 20, Now we get to the early 60s. Londoners had more disposable income than ever before and were looking for ways to spend it. Nationally, weekly earnings in the 1960s outstripped the cost of living by a staggering 183%. That's what I mean when they went from extremely tight-gripped financially to this massive explosion. By the mid-60s, all eyes were on London, the swinging capital of the world, where radical changes to social and sexual politics were fanned by a modern youth. Britain was undergoing a cultural revolution, symbolized by its pop and fashion exports like Beatlemania and the miniskirt. The iconic statuses of popular shopping arenas, the King's Road, Kensington, and Carnaby Street, the political activism of anti-nuclear campaigns, and sexual liberation. One place that you would get all of your fashion knowledge from at this time was Queen magazine run by Jocelyn Stevens. This was where you went for all the makeup, fashion, etc. But Jocelyn Stevens also helped funded her own pirate radio station called Radio Caroline, named after the boat Caroline that the radio stations were on. So if you don't know about pirate radio, there's an amazing movie on it called The Boat That Rocked / Pirate Radio. The soundtrack is one of the best movie soundtracks, in my opinion, ever. The costumes, incredible. Philip Seymour Hoffman, is that his name? Is in it. Douglas Booth is in it. January Jones is in it. Like, amazing. And the reason why, so a backstory on pirate radio. Britain had extremely strict censorship laws when it came to music. So did the United States, but we're talking about Britain here. And as a result, because Britain is an island, people would be getting these little dinghy boats, these just whatever they could afford boats. They would scrape together money with all their friends, bootleg these records like Elvis, Chuck Berry, and then later on the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, the Kinks, and play them on pirate radio stations, usually only after like a certain hour in the night. And you would turn it up and you would be able to listen to these songs that BBC Radio 1 would never, ever play. So that was the importance of pirate radio. And the reason why I'm talking about music in context is because all of this really influenced the fashion at the time. The whole point of this is that we were finally liberated from the confines of war. So we were no longer trying to just get married off at 18, go to war, die, whatever, have a zillion kids. All of a sudden, a birth control pill is becoming invented at this time. Probably one of the greatest inventions of all time, right? People have more money, youth have more freedom. We're doing away with this like sexual confines, heterosexuality, heteronormativity, and we're becoming more sexually liberated. People aren't just staying virgins until they're married anymore. Teenagers are sleeping around, and that very much influenced the fashion. Skirts were short. I mean, your butt cheeks and your undercarriage are basically out. Men were dressing more dandy-like. Everything was just more relaxed, colorful, and free. Mod-related fashion, such as the miniskirt, stimulated fashionable London shopping areas, such as Carnaby Street and King's Road, and Vidal Sassoon created the bob haircut, which, other than the fabulous beehive styles at the time, the bob really took over in the 60s. Who is the swinging Londoner? Let's talk about them. Some icons of the swinging London scene were Patty Boyd, Twiggy, Jean Shrimpton, Marsha Hunt, Verushka, Peggy Moffat, and Penelope Tree. The model Twiggy has been called the face of 1966 and the Queen of Mod, a label she shared with, among others, Kathy McGowan, the host of Ready, Steady, Go from 1964 to 1966. This was a sort of like teen rocker Ed Sullivan show. Johnny Carson's show. It was run, again, by Kathy McGowan, a badass woman who had her own little show and would have the Stones, the Kinks, the Who, the Beatles, Dusty Springfield on, and they would literally be like surrounded by all these teenagers. The model Jean Shrimpton was another icon and the world's first supermodel. She was the world's highest paid and most photographed model during this time. She was called the face of the 60s and is considered by many as the symbol of swinging London and the embodiment of the 60s. Designers that really embodied the swinging London scene were Mary Quant. If you don't know about Mary Quant, she basically invented the miniskirt, invented the mini dress, the shift dress that I'm sort of wearing right now, that style, short, very gamine, boyish, that's her. Mr. Fish and Sir Tom Baker definitely took over the men's fashion scene, which we're going to get into. I don't tend to talk a lot about men's fashion because it's boring, but the Peacock Revolution, which is going to be our next segment, is the best time for men's fashion. Other designers are like Mary Mako and John Stephen, who also very much influenced the time. The likes of the swinging Londoner are rock music, pirate radio, photography, modeling, art, sexual freedom, protests, being a badass. The swinging Londoners hang out in discotheques, Carnaby Street, King's Road, Chelsea, new trending shops, artist saloons, parlors where they could meet musicians. It was just the ultimate, it was the first really big iteration of the teenager and youth movement. They called it the youth quake. So now we're gonna talk a little bit about fashion. So this is an excerpt from an article on Mary Quant, an interview with her from the Telegraph. It began with the opening of Bazaar, her first shop on King's Road in 1955. The gamine gingham dresses sound tame, if remarkably contemporary, but it was the length, or lack thereof, that had people banging on the windows in disgust. I think they sensed it was about youth and a new generation, and that scared them. And don't forget, there was nothing else then. Fashion was for the elite. You went to Paris to the couture houses, or you tore out pictures from magazines and tried to find a dressmaker who could more or less copy it. Rationing had only just begun to phase out. The last big thing has been Dior's new look, and if you want the honest truth, that never took off. It was too restricting. So all of a sudden, fashion sort of started to be about freedom in more than one way. So we did tie-dye, we did flower power, anti-Vietnam War motifs, we had short skirts, wide leg pants, more women were wearing pants, more men were wearing frilly clothes. It was just, everything was getting blurred and more fun after a few decades of darkness, because again, Britain had been struggling since like World War I in terms of just being bombed and rations and just economy, everything. So now we're going to talk about the Peacock Revolution. I genuinely thought of making this its own video because I could just go into so much depth with it. I love it. But because I don't normally talk about men's fashion, I thought I would just do its own excerpt in this Swinging London overarching video. As the 1960s gathered pace, the standard template for men's suit began to accommodate subtly daring new elements. The collarless jacket, a look popularized by the Beatles in 1963, the year they launched their first album, and slim-fitting trousers matched with heeled boots rather than shoes. Flamboyant elements such as embroidery and vividly printed shirts became acceptable parts of the everyday male dress code, in London at least. By the mid-1960s, fashion-conscious young Londoners were challenging the staid rules of masculine etiquette that had persisted since Victorian times. Circulating in the overlapping worlds of fashion, music, and the newly influential media and high society, a social group forged a bold new identity, the modern dandy. Unashamed to wear frills, velvet, and other elements previously judged to be too feminine for a man. A growing interest in historic revival and various cultures encouraged British people to trawl secondhand shops for vintage clothes, particularly the fashions of the 1930s and 40s, and garments with connections to other parts of the world, to create looks through less consumeristic means. We love to see that here. Swinging 60s, OG thrifters. As the 1970s approached, taking inspiration from the 40s and 30s, lapels and trousers took on exaggeratedly wide dimensions for both men and women, and the traditional distinctions between menswear and women's wear became blurred. But through the Peacock Revolution, some men were able to blur the gender lines without much pushback. Why? Because the hottest rock stars were doing it. The sex bombs like Mick Jagger were stepping on stage in dresses, and Jimi Hendrix were rocking poet blouses, though one's masculinity was obviously not something to be threatened because of clothing. The Guardian pointed out, quote, "Ever since Elvis wore eyeliner, men in rock have enjoyed a bit of dressing up and challenging the cultural idea of masculinity. Some of the most iconic men in pop, David Bowie, Mark Bolan, Jimi Hendrix, ruled rock airwaves done up to the nines in frilled blouses, glitter makeup, brocade, high heels, and feather boas." Now, men, I know like my demographic isn't exactly men, but if you're watching this, listen up. This is girl advice. Okay, men, I know what you want. You want sex, right? You want sex. You want to sleep with as many women as possible, correct? We're all on the same page with that? Yeah, great. Let's be real for a sec. Paul McCartney, Jimi Hendrix, Mick Jagger. If you combine those three men in terms of how many women they've slept with, throw out a number. 2,000? Stamp it. 2,000 women. That's being kind of conservative for Mick Jagger. Now, look how these men were dressed. Look at the frills. Look at the effeminate styles. Look at how they move. Look at Elvis, Jim Morrison, Mick Jagger, George Harrison, Jimi Hendrix, David Bowie. These guys were pulling tail. They were getting snatch, right? So much. And they were dressing a little fruity. So, girl to guy, if you want to get as much tail as Mick Jagger and all of those other rock stars, start dressing like the Peacock Revolution, because I personally will sleep with you. I'm kidding. This is sexy. Think of sex symbols. These sex symbols of all time. Elvis, Mick Jagger, these were effeminate men. And they were so hot. And when you go into the 70s, the Bee Gees, these guys were sex symbols. They were kind of effeminate. When you go into the 80s, look at Twisted Sister, Bon Jovi, Motley Crue. These were the Mick Jaggers of the time. I mean, Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, these guys were sleeping with everybody. And they were wearing makeup, they had big hair, they're a little fruity, a little feminine. So I'm being honest with you, male population out there. You want sex? We want Peacock Revolution dressing. If you want sex, dress like the Peacock Revolution and you'll get sex. I'm like partially joking, but like ladies, comment, tell them down below. We want men to dress like this again. All right, so now we're gonna do a little bit of a breakdown of the swinging 60s aesthetic. When I think of colors, I just think of a lot of patterns. They did a lot of like black and white, but I also think of those like burnt oranges and yellows of the 60s as well, and a lot of primary colors. The Union Jack was very popular at this time, so that's gonna have like royal blue, red, you know, those power colors. Staples of the swinging 60s aesthetic were heeled boots, knee-high boots, gladiator sandals, Mary Janes, frilly blouses, turtlenecks, mini dresses, mini skirts, velvet suits, wide-leg trousers with like a flare at the end. Favorite accessories of the swinging Londoner are gonna be big oversized belts, chain belts, lots of necklaces, kind of like rattan or knit purses, lots of fringe, suede, sort of some Western influences going in there. And they took a lot of influences from the East, from like India. So they were taking influences from all over and incorporating 1940s fashion into it as a vintage style. So it was very eclectic. It was very thrifty, different, unique. It was about individuality. So finally, in terms of getting the swinging 60s look, I think the most easy kind of gut reaction thing would be kind of a turtleneck under a mini dress or with a mini skirt, tall boots, some kind of primary colored tights. Tights were so popular then, and they're becoming so popular this season, so it's a great time to try it out. Mary Janes are also a really good option for you if you are a man or you just want to dress more masculine in the swinging 60s aesthetic. We're talking cords, velvet, paisley, poet blouses, frilly collars, pirate shirts, some medieval revival things that happened more in the late 60s, early 70s, but we did still have some medieval influences at that time. Obviously, I think doing 60s hair and makeup also will really push it. I've recently learned how to do a beehive and I don't know how to act anymore. Sorry. I did do some 60s makeup. I'm not gonna lie. So the iconic 60s makeup look is like, or the iconic 60s female look was an incredibly boyish body, no boobs, no hips, like very flat, with huge doe eyes, Twiggy, Jean Shrimpton, etc. I am of Germanic descent, so like I have those like Cro-Magnon brows that kind of go down. So the 1960s makeup doesn't necessarily suit my features, but I don't care. I love it. I think it's kind of easy to do something vaguely 60s. Again, there's certain motifs like cord, velvet suit sets, or stripes, and lots of patterns, it's a frivolous, fun aesthetic, frivolous, fun movement. It was about teenagehood, youth, sexual freedom. So you want to dress sexy and fruity and flirty, men and women. You want to have your chest hair out. You want to have your skirt kind of come up above your butt. You want to have little heels for both men and women. Like, it's all about that. Knee socks and tights are going to be your best friend. Layering some belts, frilly sleeves. It's just a fun fashion time. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you liked it. Let me know if you want me to do other vintage styles or if you want me to do a deep dive in the peacock revolution, because I will. And comment down below what else you'd like to see from me in November, because I'm always taking your suggestions. Follow me on TikTok and Instagram if you want to see more of my personal style, and subscribe to my channel because I post videos every Thursday. And with that, have a groovy, groovy day, baby. Bye.